Resistenza. This is an Italian game with a very important topic. Very important, especially for somebody like me who is from Italy and actually is from northern Italy, which was the area that was most involved in World War II with the anti-Nazi fascist resistance. It was at a time, of course, when the Germans had occupied Italy. They were being supported by some Italians that were still loyal to the old regime, and that's why we talk about the Nazi fascist occupation. But then we also had people that were fighting against that. Bands of people like you and I who, instead of just staying home and waiting for the war to be over, they would hide in the mountains, they would fight with whatever weapons they were able to find, and they would try to harass the Nazi fascists. If that military force of the Germans was being so hard to defeat by trained armies like the American army or the other armies of the Allies, you can imagine, of course, these young people, these untrained people, were not going to win the war, and also we know that, in fact, the military impact of the resistance, of the partisans, was minimal. But the political and cultural impact was huge because these people still fought, still suffered, still died, and by the end of the war, that demonstrated to the Allies which side many Italians were on. In this game, which is cooperative with a semi-cooperative variant, one or more players will control groups of partisans, and you will be hiding in the mountains, collecting resources, recruiting people, scouting larger cities where there is Nazi-fascist activities, and in particular, you'll keep an eye on convoys. The main heart of the game is that you will be ambushing Nazi-fascist convoys, try to steal their stuff, try to kill their people, and you're trying not to get caught and not to be hurt too much in the process. There are enemy tokens that you shuffle together at the beginning of the game and you place in tiles, in stacks, and you don't know the value, different numerical values. As you can see, during the game there will be game effects that will place these on the board, forming convoys, and there will be game effects that will move the convoys on the map, and that's when you will be trying to attack them. If you're able to defeat a convoy, then the tokens that formed it will go in this bag here, which is your personal bag. If you miss a convoy, or else there are other negative game effects that will cause those tokens to be placed in this other bag, which is the Nazi fascist bag. Simple as that. At the end of the game, you empty the two bags. If the resistance bag has more points in it than the Nazi fascist bag, then you win the game. If they have more activity, if they have more points in here, then you lose the game. You and everybody else you're playing with. Because again, the game can be played solo, which is the way I played it, but can also be played cooperative. That brings a big element of randomness, yes, but it just feels right. It just feels like it really fits the theme, that you work so hard to ambush a convoy that doesn't really have anything in it because you were working with some limited intelligence, and because of that you're depleted, and then there is a really powerful convoy that waltzes through the board and causes you to lose the game. It is a game that really has a strong thematic feel, and to me that is one of really the biggest attractive elements of this game. You don't see many games that really have an emphasis on civilians embracing arms against oppression, and that to me is very valuable. And again, some of the elements of the design, like this big random element when it comes to final scoring, I wouldn't be happy about it with other games, but I'm okay with this one because theme. The board is divided into areas, and as you can see, different areas have different indications of the kind of road that you can reach from there. So for example, from Tendola, I can reach the AF road, or I can reach the AS road right there. And it also tells me the distance. The number of arrows is the distance from that location to those roads. During the game, in order to move, you will need to discard cards to pay for the cost of the arrows. And it really, again, captures a very important concept of the resistance, which is the further you are from the road, the more you're hiding on the mountains, the harder it is for the Nazi fascists to capture you, and the more cumbersome it is for you to actually attack. And so if your brigade is right next to the road, you don't have to pay much to attack, only one arrow, all right. But then when they attack you, it's also a lot easier for them to attack you. Other concepts, each band has a commander that comes with several tokens representing unique powers. Different commanders will have different tokens with different icons. A nice player rate for each commander, giving you different options. These are the options that you can take, the things that you can do in a standard turn. If your brigade is exposed because the enemies get a sense of where you are, then you flip it to this side and it just gives you fewer game options. And then you have discs representing the people in your brigade. Say, for example, I spent actions and I formed my brigade, and that's what it looks like when it's on the board. These cubes here, these represent threat, how much the enemies get a sense of where you are. The more actions you perform, the more threat that it will be generated, and simply you collect these cubes. The big one is 3, the other ones are 1, and you place them in your personal play area. You cannot have more than 6, and if you have 6, that's pretty bad. That's pretty bad, trust me. We have a deck of event cards up. You don't use all of them in every game, and you simply select several semi-randomly. There's a fairly elaborate procedure to put together the deck so that the deck will have a random element. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but there's a certain architecture, there's a certain structure. Things will tend to happen in a certain order. In particular, of course, you will want the cards that form convoys, again by placing those enemy tokens in different cities, to be placed in the deck above the cards that will cause the convoys to move. And so I'm not going to make the actual deck right now. As you can see, there are all these indications here that again are used to set the deck. Each game is divided into seasons. Each season has 4 turns, as indicated by these spaces here on the board. When a player takes a turn, they place their brigade marker there. The next player places theirs, and the next player places theirs. If we have fewer than 4 players, then simply I remove mine. But when we get to the last turn of a season, there's a special procedure in which you get to collect more resources, but you also have to spend them to feed your soldiers, and then you start the next season, and you continue like this until the deck of event cards is depleted. And again, at that point, you check the backs and you see how the game went. These cards are very important because these are your resources. You want to collect them during the game because you're going to use the numbers and symbols that you see on them. The arrows, again, are used to pay for distance. The number you see in the middle, that represents combat value. These are used to move your brigades. These symbols here are used to hide, that is to reduce your threat. And so during the game, it's just a good idea to get those. At the beginning of each turn, you draw an event card. If there is a machine gun on top there, then you need to resolve an attack from the Nazi fascists against the active brigade, the brigade whose turn it is right now. And there's a procedure. You'll roll a die and you will compare it with your present threat. And basically, the game is a bit procedural. I'm not going to explain the procedures in detail because I'm afraid it's going to sound a lot more confusing than if you just sit down, set up the game, put the procedure in front of you, and you go step by step a couple of times. The idea is that the closer you are to the road and the more people you have and the more threat you have, the more likely you are that the die roll is going to cause you trouble, cause you damage, and cause your brigade to get exposed and attacked. After you resolve, and cards are resolved from top to bottom actually. So the machine gun, that takes a lot of attention, of course, but the indication on top tells you where you're gonna place the enemy tokens, the convoys, how many and where. For example, this is the card when Reggio Emilia takes one token. If this is the card, I'll place one in Parma, and so on and so forth. So first you place new tokens to form the convoys. Then you may have to resolve an enemy attack, and then you simply, going down, you do what the card says. There are different effects that can apply. And some of these effects will trigger a convoy. So then you're told where the convoy is moving. So that was the car from Parma to La Spezia. The convoys don't need to move physically, although you can, if you want, even make that weird noise. The important thing is that once you're told which convoy is moving and where they're going, then you know which roads they are moving on. And that means that indicates who can attack them based on where your brigades are and the distance. In the standard game, each convoy can be attacked only once. There is a variant in which you can attack it multiple times with different brigades, but then attacks after the first suffer a penalty. To attack a convoy, when the convoy event has been resolved, you need to discard cards to pay for the distance. You reveal the convoy, and then you need to discard cards to match or exceed the number indicated by the total on the tokens. So basically use these as combat values. If you succeed in doing that, then you defeated the convoy. Otherwise, there are other things that happen, and they're not good. Again, that's the general idea. When there is an effect that causes them to attack, the good thing is that they receive a number of cards, and they also have to discard cards to pay for the distance to reach you. Again, that's why the closer you are to the road, the fewer cards you have to pay to attack them, but also the closer you are to the road, the fewer cards they lose when they're attacking you. So, this is pretty much a general idea, mind you. Again, the game is a bit procedural, a bit fiddly at times, let's face it. But that's an idea of how to resolve these cards. And then, and sometimes that's a pretty epic battle between, the partisans and the convoy. But then it's time for the active brigade to actually start performing actions. You have a list of actions you can perform in any order multiple times, as long as you can pay for them with your resources, and as long as you don't accumulate more than 6 threat tokens. Actions are, if you're not on the board, you can spend resources to form a brigade, and you really need to do that. Otherwise, what are we talking about? Recruit, which is when you gain a threat and you recruit a new disc. Equip, you receive a threat and you get a card, which again you will use for combat value or possible symbols. Dispatch, which is when you're allowed to trade cards and resources between different groups. Recon, you receive a threat, you discard. Arrows equal to the distance of the city where you're sending somebody to take a look, to peek at the tokens that are there. So the recon action, again, based on distance, gets you threat, but allows you to get a good sense of what is in the convoy. Then we have an action that in the English version is called diffuse, and that's really not a good translation for the Italian rifugio, which is what the Italian rulebook says. Shelter would have been a better option, I believe. When you take the diffuse/shelter action, you can discard threat equal to the number of these tokens that you discard from hand. You can also send some of your discs home, and that also reduces the threat that you have. Again, remember, these actions you can take in different orders, so I can do some actions that gives me threat, then I shelter, this sort of thing. I can disengage, which is I discard 2 footprint symbols to move a brigade 1 space, just like so. I can also march, in which case is the only action I take that turn. It's pretty big, but I can move anywhere I want, and I also lose a threat. a threat cube. So I like that, the sandbox element that you have. So generally speaking, the idea is use event cards to create effects that will create convoys, move convoys, launch attacks against you. Then use these actions that will give you good stuff, but also will cause threat. Do actions to reduce that threat, and continue like this until the end, until the event deck is exhausted. At that point, there's a special phase that represents the frantic, desperate activity of the last days of the war. After that, check the bags and see if you won or you lost. Resistenza to me is an important game because it covers an important topic that we do not see represented at quite that level of detail in wargaming or in historical gaming in general. Maybe you have a war game where there is a token that represents the partisans, but and again, while that militarily makes sense because the impact of resistance actions in World War II was minimal, culturally, politically, it is something that deserves to be remembered, to be honored, and yes, to be played with, because playing a game about a topic is a way of keeping the topic alive, keeping the memory alive, and to see the challenges, the historical context from the point of view of the people that were there. So I'm very happy that there is a game about the Italian resistance, which is particularly important for me and for my family history. Now, the game is not that easy to learn, not that easy to grok, because it's fairly procedural. Many steps here, many steps there, slightly different procedures for the way in which you attack them, they attack you. So you just have to keep the rule book handy and go through all those steps a couple of times until you become familiar with the steps, and then you can really then start paying attention to the strategy, to what you're trying to achieve and how to get there. Expect the first game or two to be particularly hard, again, in terms of learning the procedure and in terms of not messing up too much. You'll always find yourself too far or too close, and then after a while, then you start optimizing the strategy, and maybe you don't lose too bad, you don't lose too horribly. But it's still a pretty difficult game to master. But once you get past the procedures, again, you have a game that feels really intensely thematic, and to me, this is the main value of the game. It is a game that feels so darn thematic, so appropriate, so accurate. It really represents the dynamics, the challenges that you have there. And again, mechanically, it works also if you are willing to deal with an amount of randomness that may simply determine the game. May simply you did everything right, but you kept attacking convoys that weren't worth much. Well, then I'm gonna spend more recon actions. But then with that great recon, then you're not able. Then now you know that's a great convoy, but you don't have anything that you can throw at it. So definitely a challenging game, both to master in terms of learning the rules and procedures, and some of the fiddly elements here and there, and then to master in the sense of to be able to do well. Which, especially the second part, it's a good thing, of course, because you have a nice challenge. But again, the idea of seeing this much neglected element of history come to light through the game, to me, that's very important, very relevant. It's also good that you can play the game solitaire. That's the way I played it, but you could also play cooperative. The game comes with different variants, optional rules, such as playing semi-cooperatively, one attack to the convoys, multiple attacks. You get different ways in which you can approach the game, which of course also increases the longevity of the game. What you saw in this video, maybe I should have pointed that out earlier, is a prototype, so it's entirely possible that later versions, final versions, will look somewhat different, but I'm given to understand that the general engine, the general idea will remain the same. Also, the copy that I saw has basically 2 full editions of the game in it. There's a full deck of cards of event cards and character cards in English, and then the same set in Italian. I assume later on they will, when you buy the game, there will be one version or the other. At least I hope they do so, because it's more environmentally friendly and also will cut costs. But take that into account, that some elements may still change there. In general, this is a solid game, not a casual game, but because of the certain heaviness of the topic, and in particular because the procedural nature of many of the dynamics of the mechanics and the action resolutions. But definitely is a game worth taking a look at and worth playing, because if you're interested in the topic, it is a worthy game, it is an interesting game, and it is fun. Again, somehow there's something particularly somber and heavy about this game. Fun only partially describes the kind of emotional response that I had to it, but it's a game that is engaging, it's well designed, and again, very important topic, which makes it a very important game.